we've looked at what the fundamentals are, the invisible rules that designers are following, taking those designs and creating code to represent them so that we can send it out through computers and people like you and me can use those products. There's more invisible rules that we need to cover for developers. Typically, somebody holds more than one role. They have things that they want to contribute in different ways. I'm not separating designers and developers because I think that that's a meaningful separation. In fact, I think it's usually the same person doing something like this, creating the design and then creating the first iteration or the prototype of the code. That's why when I show the product development process, the way I understand it, after you have the idea and you've initialized like a plan, having all the stakeholders at the table, you move into prototyping it. Like, is this thing we're trying to create possible? That's when you need to start to leverage these fundamentals for HTML. Think of HTML as what you see and not how you see it. It's the content of a page, specifically on the web. They're the things you view. And the reason why we separate how you see it and what you see is so that we can understand it and create more efficient ways to translate this stuff. It gets really messy really quick. That's why we have Git as a tool to manage all the different versions of what we're creating. That's why we have GitHub to manage the communication around those versions and the process in which we deem code ready to be in the product. And it's why at this level, inside of being from a design role, a developer role, we have separation of concerns. This idea that the things that we see are separated from how we see it. HTML gives us some mechanisms for that. And we're going to dive into the separation of concerns, syntax, and even wrapping and indenting. These are, the way I see it, we're just jumping into this pool of HTML. We have to start somewhere. This doesn't mean these are the only things you need to know. These are, again, for your awareness over what it takes to create in this medium. We're going to start off with separation of concerns and what that means, move into syntax, and then how to properly organize your code from a high level. Tomorrow is where we jump into how this looks in a text editor. Separation of concerns. On the web is made up of 3 containers. The first is going to be our focus today, and it's HTML, which is the content. It's what you see. That means the text, the images, the videos. The second layer is CSS, presentation. It's the design, it's how things look. It's the layout, color, the size, things like this. Lastly, we have JavaScript. It's this outer container. The reason why it contains both of them is that you can modify CSS and HTML based on the interaction. So think of it as the interaction layer of the web. When somebody clicks or touches somewhere on an app, what happens? Well, the presentation, the modal pops up or the content changes. Maybe the image gets bigger and you get some buttons on the left and right. Think of JavaScript as the thing that's manipulating the CSS and HTML in a way that matches expectations or the design. That's why we started with the design yesterday, so that we could start to understand the invisible rules behind those. Now you get to see the containers for the different types of code and languages of code so that it's easier to work on teams and it's easier to maintain this code moving forward. There's, of course, many ways we could write this code where it intermingles and mixes all of these different types of code, but that makes it a lot harder to maintain as we move forward and a lot harder to work on a team. These are the rules of how we write code in HTML. First, let's look at what HTML looks like. I'm going to write an example of a P tag. First, let's talk about the letter P. What this represents in both of these instances is a tag. Inside of these angle brackets, is what I call these, are tag names. This is what denotes what type of content it is. The P stands for paragraph. That means you're going to have multi-line content, probably a body of text, a lot of text inside of this. You choose P based on what you want to represent. You wouldn't link with a P tag to another website or to somewhere else inside of your website. You would choose a P tag based on something called semantics. We're choosing the tag name based on the content inside of it. And where you put content inside of a p tag is in here. In between this open and close tags, so I'm reusing the word tag to denote this is an open tag and a closed tag. This is content inside of it. And I'm also showing you typically tab in here. To show that the content has a relationship to the p tag, we tab it inside of it. This is indenting. Much like the rules with writing papers for school or some of the conventions of writing emails, indenting or tabbing help us understand this relationship, and we can be more professional with the way that we write our code, more effectively illustrate the intent of why we're writing the code the way that we are. Another thing to note here is that the content is wrapped by the open p tag and the closing p tag. Let's look at one more example and one more rule of syntax for HTML. Attributes. So we're going to have an a tag and a closing a tag. So you might ask, why didn't I put the right angle bracket right next to the a tag? Which, by the way, this is an anchor tag. This allows us to link somewhere else on the web or somewhere else inside of our web page. The reason why I haven't closed it yet is that we need an attribute here, an equal sign, 2 quotes, and then a link, google.com. And then I can close it. And inside of this, I'll put some content of, this is again indented in, and the text of go to Google is content to the a tag. The attribute we're going to write is href, href equals 1 quote, the content of google.com or the value of google.com, and then an ending quote. Much like we have an open tag and a close tag, we need an open quote and a close quote. And I can't forget this angle bracket. This is a lot of syntax to keep in mind, but again, I'm going through these to help you become aware of the rules behind here. We're gonna jump into a text editor tomorrow so that you can start to get the muscle memory or become aware of the how it looks through a text editor.